Okay, we're on. It's going. Let's paint and let's learn together. Hi everyone, and welcome to this first live session of our Heart-Led Landscapes interactive course. This is July 2020. We are going through Heart-Led Landscapes together. This live course actually gets rolled into the course content. So if you've purchased the course and enrolled in that, that will be accessible to you anytime, as long as that course exists on the internet, which will be a very long time. I have no plans to take them off. And uh, you also get to benefit from the live sessions we did last year when we first rolled out this course. The great news is for you is every year I become a better painter and a better teacher little by little. That's something you can be assured of as well as you seek to grow your skills. We just keep growing. I'm kind of fighting a sneeze here, so bear with me. And as we grow and learn, we just get better. And that's something I think I always say that I don't have to worry about fear getting older because I'm going to be a better painter as I grow and age. And that's something to look forward to. So here we are, digging into Heart-Led Landscapes, and there's a lot of content there to go through. When I first started I've wanted to be a landscape painter ever since I first started painting. And as I focused on applying what I knew and getting better at that, because it didn't feel like it came naturally for me, it's a journey. It takes a long time, and I'm still not where I want to be. I still feel like I'm very hit or miss when it comes to creating a landscape that I'm really excited about. But I've realized that that's actually okay. I've made peace with it because I think it's part of the learning process. So, as much as I know my paintings are going to be better as I keep working at growing my landscape skills, I can also have peace where I'm at, because it's an important part of the process to be growing and to be growing those skills. And where you are right now is just fine. We, I want to just this is our very first live broadcast for for this Heart-Led course, and so I want to just cover a few details before we get into. We're going to do some painting. You don't have to paint. You can just watch along and then use the replay option to paint along with me if you feel like that will help you grow your skills to watch and paint. I feel like the first time you watch a painting lesson, a lot of the time it's better to just watch, soak it in, then go through it again and paint along with it. You'll just get more out of it than if you're trying to simultaneously watch and listen and do all at the same time. So we'll be doing some painting. I'm going to be talking about some of the obstacles you might encounter as we go through the course. I'm going to elaborate on a few of the things that we cover in the course. We're mostly focusing on value studies right now, and then how do we work that into a painting. So we'll be talking about that. Okay, but before we do that, I want to thank Robin, first of all, for being here. Robin is my very capable operations manager. That's a working title. We started out as assistant, but she does so much more than assist me. She really is my right hand person, and I'm left handed, so I really need an able right hand. So Robin will be listening, watching the chat here, and she'll answer questions if you're having any trouble with the broadcast. If you have questions that she can answer directly, and then she'll also be saving questions for me to answer, and we'll be covering those. So you can feel free to ask questions at any time through this broadcast, and we'll get to those. I already see a question from Carol, and it's especially relevant to what I want to talk about first, and that is how to use the course, how to go through the course and get the most out of it. With Heart-Led Landscapes this time around, I have brand new students to the course here, and we also welcome past students. If you have purchased the course in the past, or if you are an enrolled member in our Fearless Artists community, which is a monthly membership that gives you access to almost all of my course content, as well as the membership community, which you should have been getting to know by now, because with your Heart-Led Landscape enrollment, you received a free month of access to the community, which is where we do our interactive stuff. In the community, Yeah, so I know there's many of you who are quite new to this. We also get to have students who have gone through the course in the past, and I think that that brings so much to the course experience, because those experienced students can really help guide you as well. You can follow their example of how they're applying what they're learning and how they're thinking about it. And they're additionally getting more out of the course the second time around, because as we grow, our readiness to learn new content continues. And so little things that maybe flew over our heads the first time we went through the lesson, all of a sudden we're ready for them, and we get to implement that. So I love that there are so many students who are willing to go through the course again. Okay, housekeeping. First of all, if you're watching this live stream, you've clicked on the link in your email, and I do send out email announcements, links to these live videos. I send out other bonus tips and content that I think will help encourage you or guide you through the course. So that happens in your email, but we also have our Fearless Artist course group. So that's with your 1 month Fearless Artist membership. You can participate in the course group where you can post your work and ask for, well, just share what you're learning, and ask for help and guidance if you'd like. That is all available in the Fearless Artist community membership. So it's a bonus thing. You can participate in that if you wish. It's totally optional. If you have not received your coupon or aren't sure how to log in and get that all set up, do send an email to info@angelafehr.com. And Robin, and I've got a great team there. Robin, Reyesa, Mercedes, they're all really great at helping make sure that you're taking advantage of everything you get with this course content. Christine comments that I really struggled the first time. I'm doing much better and enjoying it more this time around. It was so much to take in the first time. Yes. It's tricky because, we're doing 4 weeks of interactive content. This is not a course you can take in entirely in 4 weeks. Anytime we're learning, we have to make peace with this process. Our readiness to learn is only has so much capacity. And so at a certain point, you're just going to start to feel maybe a little overwhelmed and needing to kind of maybe pause and linger over maybe some of the earlier content and not even move on with at the pace that you might see other students doing. That is okay. It's a powerful asset of online learning that you can make this content work for you. Take your time. That's the best advice I give myself when I'm painting, is take your time. We so often want to rush to the end. We want to see if our painting's going to turn out, so we hurry through it rather than slowing down, being in the moment and being intentional. And I was thinking today, and it's a thought I have to unpack a little bit more because it just popped into my head this morning, that the biggest asset to our art journey is time. It's our biggest, most important resource is time. And that popped into my head. And so I have to think about that more. What does that mean? That time is our most valuable resource or asset. That means being in the moment. That means pausing and taking our time and not rushing. That means allowing ourselves time to absorb and learn new things. So take some peace along with you as you go into this, and know that you have the course. You have it there. It's not going away. You can slowly linger over it, and you'll actually get more out of it that way. So really appreciating the dialogue in the chat right now, talking about that feeling of being overwhelmed. I also want to talk about another big obstacle, and that is resistance. And then we're going to get to painting, I promise. And I want to, and answering questions and all of that. There's so much we have to do today. I'm feeling already anxious about time. Okay, pause, breathe. We can take our time here. Second big obstacle is resistance. Every time I launch a new course, there's always someone, and it's usually not very many people, so that's a good thing. But there's always somebody who emails me and says, I don't need this course. I already know all this stuff. This is the same principles that are taught by that other teacher. And and yet you're still taking courses. So obviously okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. There are a finite number of techniques that you need to know to be a good artist, to be a good artist, to paint strong paintings, to paint technically competent paintings. There are a finite number of techniques. There are a finite number of principles. They're pretty universal. You can do a Google search and it will come up with artistic principles, watercolor techniques, and they're all there. And yet, we're not the artists we want to be. Google search didn't do it. So in coming into a course and seeing that there is an element of familiarity to the content. Oh, Angela's talking about value studies. Well, every watercolor artist talks about value studies. And that's valid. That's totally true. I can't reinvent the wheel. It's a great wheel, so we don't need to reinvent it. But we do need to do it. We do need to be very aware that when we feel resistance, that when we right away come and we are here to receive instruction, and our instructor says something that we think we know, sometimes we put up blocks like, okay, there's nothing new for me here. And the fact is, I really try to approach for myself any instructor, any artist that I meet, and it doesn't even matter skill level here. I learn a lot from you as you share what you're learning in your watercolor journey. There's always something to be learned. There's always a new perspective. There's always like a little new facet of that topic that I hadn't thought of yet. It's big, it's deep. It's not so simple as just it's not as simple as just saying, okay, I know about value studies. Learning a little bit more and a little bit more, and we add it in. And so I feel like we have resistance because change is a bit of a scary thing. And so as you come in, I really feel like I'm not explaining this well. Just bear with me. I've probably resisted to explaining it well. I don't know. If you're going to make changes, if you're going to grow as an artist, you are going to experience resistance. There is a lot of comfort in doing what's familiar and what we know how to do. If you've been painting in watercolor for several years and you've developed some methods for creating paintings, and yet you want to be looser in your paintings, you're going to resist yourself a little bit. You're going to fight that because it's stepping out of the familiar, out of what you know you can do. And so I really want to encourage you, if you're feeling that initial resistance, like, oh, I already know all this stuff, bear with me a little bit. Be willing to let go of some pride and say, okay, what if I don't? What if there is more here that I just haven't thought of yet? What if I committed just a little bit more fully? If you do that, these are the students that I see transformed through this course. The ones who are willing to fully commit, to be willing to say, okay, I've heard these topics before, I've studied them a little bit, but I'm going to position myself as a student here so that I can get the most out of this course that I can. Those are the students that see the most growth. That's what I really want for you. Hopefully that makes sense, and that's that I got to my point. Yeah, Kay says there's always something to learn no matter how long you've been painting. And, I think some of the best painters are the most humble about this. They are so willing to acknowledge that we're just all kind of sitting at the feet of watercolor, trying to learn all we can. And yes, and Janie says, if you want to be more successful with anyone, it means learning new habits. Yes, behavior is different than knowledge. Yes, we can't just know it. We have to get it through into our hearts, and then it has to come out our fingers. Okay, enough rambling about resistance. I want to just, you're going to know it if you're feeling resistance. Be willing to challenge that. Be willing to fight against it. Kick it out of the room, and let's all be those humble students sitting at the feet of the teacher. And that's not me, it's watercolor. Okay, we're gonna talk about value studies, and I thought the best way to do that would be to do it as we work through a painting. So I'm going to just demonstrate that for you today, and I can't make any promises that this is going to be some great masterpiece or something like that. It's to the best of my knowledge, I'm not going to make a fantastic painting today, but I am going to demonstrate a process, and it's a process that that's going to just kind of elaborate on what, or just reinforce really what we've already been talking about, what we've already done. So let's just open up my reference photo, and you can take a look at that for a second. I was very fortunate over the weekend. We went camping about a couple hours from home. And this is near Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia. We're in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The mountains start to round off a little bit as you move farther north. And so they're not the jagged rocky peaks that you see in Jasper or Banff, but they have a beauty all their own. We stopped at this lake called Moose Lake, and this was just before sunset. I just thought this was so beautiful. And as I thought about what we could paint today, this one popped into my head. So I first, in my pursuit of wanting a strong painting, I converted the reference photo to black and white, as you can see here. And that gave me the opportunity to study those values a little bit. And now we're just going to move to my work surface. And then we'll talk about, I'll show you some of the research that I've done since then. Okay, so I printed off those photos as well, so I can pull them out as necessary. There we go. And so last night, and I've only spent about maybe less than an hour in the things I'm going to show you in the development pieces. I've got a fresh sheet of paper for today's version, but last night I just pulled out my watercolor sketchbook and did a value study. The travel palette I had didn't have indigo or Payne's gray, so I used a violet, which was fine. And it gives me a nice darkest dark. It lets me dilute to almost white, so that totally works. And then I did a very, very quick sketch using a few colors just to start. And really this kind of sketch, I don't feel like it gives me, this isn't the kind of sketch where I would set my reference photo aside and then paint my next version from this sketch. What I really feel like I'm doing in these first couple of versions is I'm training my eye to start communicating with my brain and with my hand. So I need to open a dialogue between what I saw as I stood at the lake's edge, what I see in my reference photo, and what I'm putting on the paper. And as I start painting, I'm spending time looking back and forth between the two. I guess that would have been the black and white version. Looking back and forth, and I'm starting to notice areas that I'm going to need to be on my guard for. And for this particular painting, I knew it was going to be capturing the light in the sky, because that is such a striking part of the painting, but it doesn't cover a lot of square inch here. We have just that little bit of luminescence on the water. There's not a ton of water here. There's a lot of greenery showing. So proportionally, we have a small area where there's some very strong contrast, and everything else kind of flows together in a little more of a subtle way. So I wanted to start paying attention and noticing those things. After I did these versions, and this is all last night as I was getting ready for this lesson, I went back out to the studio and I did a version on a larger sheet of paper. And this one could benefit from some darkest darks, and I think we might try to do that today if we have time. You might notice, maybe you want to tell me, weak areas in this painting. I saw a few myself, and the very first thing I noticed was the lack of, the way I lost my whites in the water. So in the reference photo, and one thing I can tell you is anytime you have something that's bright, we've got this very great pop of light off the water. We've got a real light area around the clouds. The clouds are easy. We know that's a white. Clouds are white, so our default thought when we see a cloud is to paint it white. We also see there's a lot of gray here. But this area where the sun is peeking through, this area where the sun is shining off the water and reflecting, we almost feel like it's brighter than white. So often my tendency is to think I need something more than white. That's not enough. And it's not the case. You cannot get brighter than the white of your watercolor paper. And so if you need to create something that is as bright as can be, you're gonna need to cling to your whitest values on your paper and pay close attention to the contrast. It is the contrast that will make that white seem ultra bright. And so that's where I'm going to need to go. It's interesting as well, and that here we really see kind of this little stripe of white in the water, but here that actually those white reflections all blur together in this larger mass. Partly I think that was probably the photo editing filter I was using. So when it comes to painting this, I'm probably going to lean more on this reference photo for this area of value contrasts. So that was just something I noticed. Okay, so I did this version, and as you can see, I lost some whites. I lost whites down here where the landscape touches the sky. There's a lot of contrast and white light value there. I lost value in the water in here. And so maybe your thought might be, why don't we use some masking fluid to leave those whites? If it's so easy to lose your whites, let's use some masking fluid. And I want to show you why I don't use masking fluid. So I just did a very quick area of masking fluid to just kind of suggest those bits and pieces here. And I really want you to see this. There's quite a bit of pasted on kind of crisp edge there. With masking fluid, we always, when you remove your masking fluid, you almost always are going to need to find a way to soften, because that white shape will look pasted on. It will stand out with those really crisp lines. And for me, I'm just, for something like this where we're painting clouds, that just doesn't really work. So the time spent in prepping masking fluid and the time spent in then trying to blend it in with the rest of the painting, that's just not worth it to me. I would much rather learn to be intentional about leaving those white areas. And the trick with that is leave a larger white area than you think you're gonna need, because your color is gonna bleed and you're just gonna have an easier time working with it. And if you can keep it very soft, your white area, very softly moving into those darker values, then you have more room for making adjustments as the painting goes along as well. Okay, so let's look at what I did today. After doing my value study in my sketchbook, I really felt like I could have spent a little more time with this. I didn't feel like this was my strongest value study that represented the photo. And so I went over into a sketchbook, and first of all, I created a notan using my photocopy here. This was just converted to black and white using Google Photos Editor. They've got like 3 different filters that do black and white, and I try to go towards the one that does the most contrast between light and dark. So I lost some of my mid grays, which is why this area looks so just black and white, I guess. Anyhow, so I did a notan version, and with notan, this is learning to see as well, connecting all those elements so that all the shadow areas are one thing and all the whites are kind of another. And so we really are abstracting the scene. And I thought it was interesting, look at how we have these 3 white shapes there. And so that gives us kind of a visual pathway. We could probably break up those shapes so that there's a little connector area of white that flows them together. so that we kind of, well, yeah, maybe. I'll think about it. And I tried using markers. I have this little box of Winsor & Newton gray pigment markers, but I didn't realize that they are also different shades. Like some are very blue gray and some are a warmer gray. And so I don't really like this value study for helping me to really think about my scene. And so I went to pencil and I just did a value study in pencil. And that was inspired a little bit by Ian Roberts. You might have seen discussion on that artist, Ian Roberts, in our Fearless Artist community. He did an interview with me just a week or two ago. A really enjoyable talk about not just about value studies and values, but about the Fearless Artist mindset as well. Okay, so I'm liking this value study. I'm feeling like between these two, I actually have a strong beginning for going in now and painting. And I don't know if you find it interesting, I kind of do, that I've already done basically 3 versions of the scene before I'm actually, and these are very, very casual. And again, this was my opportunity to open up that dialogue between my eye and my brain and my hand and start familiarizing myself with the scene, recognizing that there are some trouble areas that I'm going to fall into, and starting to plan for those. And so let's give this a try. I'm going to start, I was thinking about this reference photo, and I was thinking, what's my best way of successfully capturing the light values in this painting, in this photo? And I really think that I'll probably want to start with some not quite, almost wet and wet work. So we're going to be thinking about wet and wet painting, but working on dry paper. I do that because I'll have a little bit more control than if I were to wet my paper and truly work wet and wet. By working on dry paper, I can leave those whites, but I can also intentionally soften as I move away from them. So it gives me a little bit of control there. Yeah, so I'm just going to moisten some colors in my palette here. I was using Aussie Red Gold for my warm kind of peachy color that's in here. And I was using lavender for my water and a bit of my sky. And then I need to make a gray for my clouds. We're going to need to work with some greens as well. So we'll just start with the water, and I think probably the clouds here will happen very quickly also. I think you should be able to see everything here. It's always a challenge to getting close enough to the paper that we can see what's happening while also giving you room to see my palette and my working methods as well. Actually, I'm going to scooch down a little bit so you can see my water containers too, just at the edge of them. Okay, so here we go. Why am I so nervous? Because it's a new painting. We never know how it's going to go. So we're just going to start with the Aussie Red Gold, and I'm using a very small amount, and noticing that my horizon line is just a little bit above half. So we're going to go right about here and place that little line. And I think I'm just going to go straight down like this. And then we're going to have to move that color around to get it the way we want it to look. So just softening. And that might work. It's really pale already. We want to keep it pale. We can build up our darks, but we cannot lighten our too dark areas very well. So I really want to take my time here. And we also see this area kind of fade away and get narrower, so I want to do that. Now the thing is, I really don't like a crisp line here. It's kind of a broken line in my reference photo, so I'm actually going to wet this whole area and pull down. And so I'm right away actually doing that wet and wet thing I was telling you about. where I have that, that opportunity for the color to flow. So now I'm just going to blot a little bit, remove a little bit of moisture down the center. So I've softened the edge, but I've also removed moisture. So we're not going to see a lot of movement of color into this area that I would really like to stay white. I'm going to use my lavender right now. You're probably asking what brush I'm using. This is a big fat Escoda Ultimo synthetic. It's a number 14 round. And any large round brush is a great way to start a painting. The round brush gives you the point so you can draw shapes, but it also gives you a large carrying capacity when you're working with a large brush. And you really want to be able to carry a lot of paint and water in those early stages. And you want a large brush so that you don't start fussing over tiny details. As soon as I notice that I've clamped my hand down on the lower part of the brush, I already know that I'm starting to fuss and get really fussy with my movements. So I don't want to do that. I want to keep everything loose and relaxed. If we want to paint loose, we've got to move loose. We've got to be a little bit kind of casual about our movements. Okay, so I'm going to start to close this bottom part up. And I already feel like I'm fussing. I'd love to have big bold strokes creating this shimmer of water across the paper. But until I'm very familiar with this scene, I know I'm going to be a little more controlled than I might be able to be later on. And that's okay. So we've got that first path of light. I'm not worrying about the sky at all at this point because I have so much time. There's that big gap of land that breaks those two areas apart. And so that gives me the opportunity to work on that part after I've gotten the water where I like it. Just going to remove a little bit of water, and we're going to use the Aussie Red Gold again. And just touch in a little more beautiful light color in here. I almost feel like we've got a little stripe of warmth up here. And all I'm looking for in my reference photo right now is where are the warm colors, where are the cool colors, maybe a little bit of how dark are they. But I am trying to keep things a little more diluted than I might if I just knew the scene better. It's okay to try a little bead of pure pigment like that and see how you feel about it. If you're nervous about it, if it feels a little too strong, the paper is moist enough that we can soften it out. Okay, I'm going to get in a little closer so you can see where I'm at with this. I'm not sure that's going to be fantastic, but we're just going to keep going, getting to know this scene by working through those different shapes. Now, because this is moist and I'm doing that semi-wet and wet effect, I want to go into my greens right now, actually. And so I have a nice soft transition from water to greenery down below. I'm just working with green gold because that's my light value green, my go-to pale green. And it will make a great underpainting for the darker greens I want to layer over top later. And one reason I do this, first of all, like I said, I don't want to have hard edges between the water I've been painting and the landscape. The other thing that happens is if I'm able to fill in this area and get to a place where I have all of my shapes positioned in the scene. So all of my, basically, little color everywhere, indicating where everything belongs. That's going to give me a better ability to understand what my painting is going to look like when it's done, how everything's working together. If you're working on one area and the rest of your painting is white, with just plain white paper, it's really hard to visualize how everything's going to fit together. These white flowers here, they're called cow parsnip. I keep wanting to paint all the details there, but I think for this version, I'm just going to keep it very, very soft and pale and run together just like that. So now we have an idea of where the greenery is going to go in a much paler value than we'll actually use in the final version. I'm actually going to pull a little bit of color up here, and then we're going to start thinking about the sky. I'm not going to paint that big dark landmass yet. I'm going to wait on that. And I'm just going to blot a little bit of the excess moisture that's run down the page so it doesn't puddle at the bottom and make bleeds and backgrounds. And that's one reason I always work kind of at a tilt. I like having my board leaning up on my water container, or I'll use a roll of tape just to lift it a tiny bit where it's not going to create puddles. Often you'll see artists who talk about wanting to stretch their paper because their paper buckles so much. But if you're working at a slight angle, that will probably eliminate most of the buckling that you're struggling with, because that excess moisture will not be sitting on the paper. You know, my paper does ripple a tiny bit, but not very much. Quality of paper makes a difference there too. Right now I'm mixing cobalt blue and burnt sienna, and it's looking a little too red. Let's add some more cobalt blue. This is going to give me a beautiful gray. There was a little bit of palette dirt in here too, so it's kind of an unidentified gray. But we're going to just start painting some of our clouds. Oh, I like that color. And I like those shapes too that the side of the brush is creating. That might make really nice contrasting whites, I think. Oh yeah, I like that. Look at how that shape is really boring. And this shape is much prettier. It's all in how you place your brush. And the more time you spend at moving your brush, the easier it becomes to make strokes that look like an artist made them. When you move your brush, you know, how you lift it off the page, having color on it would be helpful. How you lift it off the page will affect what kind of shape you create and how much pressure you apply. So you can see I'm just kind of almost flicking a little bit as I lift, so I get that irregular edge. Oh, I think those are really pretty edges. A little blob of water here and there will also give you some blooms that will create some nice effects as well. Over here, my landmass is actually going to be covering part of the sky, but I still want a soft edge there so that the landmass doesn't have that bit of sky showing through. So I just softened that out. Let's add a little more blue to my gray here, a little more water, and see if we can't touch in a little bit, some smaller clouds. At the lower part of the horizon, where the sky meets the horizon, the clouds are almost always going to be small because they're far away. The clouds at the top of the page are right over your head, and so they're going to be larger. They're closer to you. I don't really like those shapes there. We're going to just soften them out. What I see doesn't always work well in my painting, so blurring together some of those shapes rather than keeping them individual like I see in my reference photo is actually a better artistically. I'm just adding more blue here. I want that sky blue from this part of the sky that's peeking through. So I'm going to use some, this is Cinereous blue. I think a cerulean might work as well, or a manganese. Anything that kind of has that more aqua color. And this is where I really want to have those white contrasts. So I don't want to touch my, well, in some spots I actually touch the cloudy areas, and in other spots we see a white edge appearing. But it's those contrasts that are going to make those whites look nice and bright. So we have to catch that. And I might need to build up those contrasts a little bit over time once this has dried. Although really for skies, I feel like the less you touch them, the more natural they're going to look. The more we move our brush, the more, what's the word? Orchestrated, the more we see the hand of the artist. And I really love, something I really love about watercolors, I love the paintings that almost look like they painted themselves, where you can't see the artist's brush strokes in the same way. I'm just using a thirsty brush, one where I've blotted most of the moisture out, to kind of soften and smudge some of these edges just a little bit more. That's kind of pretty. There is a hint of that same peachy color in here. I'm just trying to decide how to add it. I think I'm going to use a skinny brush with a fine point and just a very light touch to see if I can't just hint at some of that peachy color along the edge here. With working with orange and I'll show you, I'll get up close so you can see it. It's pretty delicate and subtle. I don't want to mix my orange with my brush into that cloud. I'm touching it in, but I don't want to stir it around because orange and blue together make a muddy neutral color. So if I want my orange to feel warm, like sunset, like at the beginning of sunset that we're getting here, I need to use a light touch and let it blend organically. And some of those shadows around the light areas are really dark, so I'm going to come back and build up those darks later on. We're going to pause for a moment. I'm going to take your questions while we let this dry a little bit. We should be able to come back in and put the landmass in and some of our darks in the foliage as well. And our darks, I want to add the darkest values in the water. I don't know that this painting will be finished today. For me to be able to paint a successful painting means I need to pause so that I can come back and evaluate. And if I'm not pausing to evaluate, I'm generally going to rush, paint beyond my plan, and start to struggle. I love being able to come into my painting with a plan of action in mind. I'm going to do this, this, and this, and then I'm going to step back and take a break so that I can evaluate and view my painting with fresh eyes, so I can let my brain catch up to my hand. If my hand is moving and my brain's slowed down, my painting's not going to go very well. Okay, lots of questions, and I know that's that we're gonna. Some of you are probably already feeling overwhelmed, but I'm gonna try to address as many as I can. Okay, I see there's comments about my black background on the painting. That is one of those dish drying mats. My mother-in-law gave me one for Christmas, and I don't wash dishes, but I'm like, I know where I can use that. And it's been a great absorbent surface for my paintings. I can work with water and let it drip off, and it's fantastic. I just throw it in the wash when I need to wash it. Okay. Cenarius Blue is made by Senelia, yes. Sue's asking about my painting. How wet is the paper at this stage? As I've painted, I started with dry paper, and as I keep painting, the moisture level on my paper changes, and it's continually changing. So as I start painting, of course, I'm adding water. I'm extending my brush, so then almost the entire surface of the painting is wet at this point. And it's wet in varying degrees. There are parts, I was just painting the sky, so the sky is quite moist. The color that I add there blends very smoothly. Down below, where I painted the water and the greenery of the landscape, which I have to show you in just a moment because it's really bleeding into my water and taking over, and I'm going to have to show you how that's okay. But that area has gotten that. I always think it's a consistency like a paper towel where you've squeezed the water out of a wet paper towel. So it's very absorbent, but it also blotches and bleeds really easily. And so I'm pausing for one reason I'm pausing is because I don't want to add a lot of color to that area until it's dried a bit more. You can add paint to that kind of damp paper if you do it with very little water on your brush. So I'm always adjusting how much water is on my brush based on how wet my paper is in the area I want to paint in and how much I want my paint to flow. It's something that I can talk about, I can demonstrate, but you have to develop a feel for it. And the very best way to do that is to put a lot of hours into painting. And as you keep painting, you get a feel for it. It starts to feel comfortable for you, and you start to be able to anticipate how much water you should be on your brush and how much depending on how much is on your paper. Really don't feel overwhelmed by this. How your climate is going to affect your drying time as well. Time will solve that issue. Trust it. Keep painting and don't get frustrated. When it goes badly, when you misjudge how much water to use, that's part of the learning process. Reba's asking, do you recommend doing a value study for every painting? I really don't always do it, Reba. I often will start a painting with great intentions to paint a masterpiece the first time. That's always my goal. And so usually my value study is me kind of dialing myself back after that first version doesn't turn out. Sometimes it's really easy to see those values maybe with a quick photo edit. Sometimes it's easy to simplify the painting, but most of the time a value study is just going to kind of, again, get that dialogue going between your eye and your hand. So I would encourage you to, just be thinking about value studies as your opportunity to take advantage of a little extra time to get to know your scene. Norma asked how I cut the paper to keep the decal edges. I use a metal ruler and I tear my paper along the ruler. It doesn't get a perfect decal edge. It doesn't perfectly match the edge that comes on a full sheet of watercolor paper, but it's close enough that it works for me. Sarah comments, time does help with judging water, although I still sometimes put my brush on the paper and then go, yikes. And that's where a thirsty brush comes in really handy because, when you blot that moisture out of your brush, it makes a really good sponge and you can use that to quickly lift that excess water. And time really does help. When we make those mistakes, they're also opportunities for learning because they help us do things that aren't in our comfort zone. When we push out of that comfort zone, we do find new discoveries. There were some questions about, the sketchbook that I used. I'll pull it over here. This is my very favorite sketchbook, and it's expensive enough that I kind of hoard it. This is made by Etcher, and it's called the Perfect Sketchbook, and it's their limited edition leather sketchbook. So this is the sketchbook that I would use where it's like, I want this to be my sketchbook for the year. I also don't want to feel like I have to make a perfect painting at every time, so I try not to think about how much it costs and just fill it. That's the goal of a sketchbook, is to be filled. The reason I like this sketchbook is because they use Fabriano paper in it, which is a really, really nice 100% cotton watercolor paper. There are other sketchbooks that they make are 100% cotton, but the quality of the paper is still not as good. Okay, I saw a great question about focal point. Deborah said, I thought I knew what focal point is until I tried identifying it. How do you find the focal point? I feel like, and I mentioned this in the Fearless Artist community, I feel like talking about focal point is a little bit of a misdirection, because when we talk about focal point, we think about one thing. And I really don't, we don't want our viewers to come into our paintings to see one thing. We want them to we want them to move through the painting. So I would much prefer to think about, rather than focal point, to think about visual pathways, maybe focal path. Visual pathways is what I like to use. So let's just switch the camera over and we'll talk about that quickly here. And then we're running out of time if I want to do a little bit more painting here. So I think what we're going to do is we'll talk about visual pathways. And then any other questions you have, let's talk about them in the Fearless Artist community. And then we'll and then we'll just keep going. We have another lesson next week, which is going to be focused on simplifying, and that will definitely be one where we talk about visual pathways. Okay, so let's take a look at this work surface. You're already seeing it because I switched the camera and I'm just not there yet, so I'll run over. Here we go. Okay, visual pathways. Where does your eye go when you look at this painting? And it's interesting because it would be easy to be unsure whether the focal point is these white flowers, the light on the water, the little break in the clouds, maybe the landscape in the distance. Those all demand our attention in different degrees. The flowers because they're the largest thing in the scene. The landscape because it's the darkest thing in the scene. And then we've got these two light value areas that are almost competing with each other. So rather than thinking about focal point, I really like to think about where does my eye go? And for that, I like to backtrack right to what did I see when I was standing there on that shoreline? And where was I looking? And I know I saw everything and framed this photograph, but I saw the flowers and the trees and the landscape as a frame for the path of light that was happening in the sky and on the water. So my memory helps me with that. And then I also want to pay attention when I first look at this reference photo, where does my eye move? Where does it come back to? Does it bounce back and forth between different elements? And I try to evaluate that in my paintings as well. See if I have something here to show you. So this one again, where does my eye go? What do I see first? Does my eye move back and forth between two competing elements? Those are the things that I'm paying attention to and asking myself. For this one, really, what's helping me right now is I'm actually looking at this through the viewfinder of the camera, and that's really showing me that my eye goes right to these clouds. Like there's the contrast right there. And I do not have that same strength of contrast down here, although it works somewhat. And this area is so pale that it's competing in a way as well. So I have these three areas where I'm kind of going back and forth. I'm looking at this first of all, but then I'm distracted by these things. And so I would want to restore that balance a little bit. Maybe I don't mind if the clouds are that bright, but maybe I'd want to add some, I need to find a brush here. Add some darker value there. So let's, where'd my lavender go? So maybe I want to just strengthen some of this with a little bit of line. And I know this painting isn't my masterpiece, and so that means I can kill it or cure it by throwing some paint at it. I want it to teach me everything that it can, and so using it to work out some of these ideas rather than doing them on my newest version, that's actually gives me the ability to be a little more of a risk taker, a little more experimental. And I often like more softness in my paintings. I'm not a big fan of putting in a lot of line. And so, here I'm experimenting. Does the line work? How much do I like it? I also want to work in some, I think one thing that will help also is building up my darkest values. I'm just using Perylene Green for this because it's a green that's a near black. I think it works really well for this water that is basically a reflection of the landscape. And maybe by doing some of those darkest darks, I'll see a little more of a successful feeling here as well. And there's some actual really dark values down in here too, at the very bottom. This is negative painting here where I'm reaching the grass and weeds. I can actually adjust the shapes of the weeds there by how I paint my line work. If you're struggling with negative painting, always be watching for places where you're actually doing negative painting and not really thinking about it. Just like painting, any object you're painting around is a negative painting. It's generally not the one thing that you do for the entire painting. It's small doses here and there. So there I've made some darkest darks, and let's carry them up into the landscape. So there was a bit of an addition of more detail here, but it's also just darkening some values has been actually a helpful way to go about it. Let's see if we can add some of that Aussie red gold with the same kind of line work. I'm curious as to whether or not that would work. It's not 100% true to my reference photo. My reference photo has just a lot more subtle softness there. But remember, we are painters, so we get to make artistic decisions that might be exaggerations, that might be maybe a little bit more like illustration or graphic design in some of the elements. And there's some amazing artists who use a lot of creative license, a lot of hard edges and crisp dark colors. There's not any one way to do it. And my goal hasn't been to reproduce my photograph, although my brain often tells me that's where I'm going. And so usually, like once I finish something like this, my reaction, my knee-jerk reaction is to say, okay, now let's do something that's much more improvisational and see if we can't create something that's a little more exciting and a little less like the photograph. So how did that work? That actually did a lot of what I wanted it to do. I'm seeing there's a really nice separation between these two areas now. This is more distinct, so your eye kind of comes back to it rather than getting pulled down into this lighter value area. And so I think that works pretty well. I probably could build up some darks here as well. Looking at this after a few hours has passed is another really good way to determine whether or not I need to add more in different areas. So I'm just gonna pull back for a moment. Everything's crooked. Wow. There we go. And take a look at it through my viewfinder. I think that's actually working really well. So yeah, I don't want the photograph to tell me what to do. I want to make my own decisions, but I have to get to know my scene in order to do that. When I see that adding detail in this area makes my water, actually that path of light work better, then maybe for the next one, I can be bolder and more daring. So the sound suddenly increased. Yes, I need maybe a second microphone would probably solve that issue, because I'm moving back and forth between my work surface and my screen, and I don't always remember to move. It's only a couple of inches, but it makes a difference. Okay. Okay, so Sharon asks, we're just going to wrap up with a few more questions, but just notice again how working some of those dark values made a big difference. When my eye is darting around in different places on the painting, adjusting my contrast in one area can bring the eye back to that area and keep it there just a little bit longer. That's very powerful. So I'm always looking for where can I increase contrast and adjust those dark values. That's why we do value studies, because this is really helps us understand the path our viewer takes through the painting, and it helps us paint it with attention to those contrasts. Reba's asking, is it better in this painting to not even paint the flowers in the foreground? The more I think about that, the more I think, yes, that's, I think, the direction I'm going. When I was standing there on the shore, the greenery in the scene was a frame to the landscape beyond. And so simplifying the greenery in order to continue to frame the landscape, that just makes sense to me. Sue's asking if I would select my colors before I begin painting. Most of the time I work quite consistently with my colors. So if I've been painting with a lot of lavender, it's going to show up in all of my paintings. So most of the time as I paint, I start with maybe one color that feels like a key to the painting. I see a lot of lavender in the water. I'm going to pull that out. And then as I go, I continue to select colors. And then as I continue to paint, if I need a new color, I try to use the colors I've already chosen. But sometimes you need to grab something else, and that's okay too. I do after working with the same palette for so long, I have a good sense of what colors work well together, and they'll appear again and again in my paintings. I apologize for the sound again. That was my mistake. Sharon asks, do you always use your colors directly from the wells and only use the mixing color when you're mixing two colors together? Yes, most of the time I will grab my color directly from the paint wells and apply it to my paper. If I'm mixing two colors together, then I use my paint wells, but I don't use the palette wells very often anymore. That has changed. As I've gotten more experienced as a painter, I've needed the palette mixing areas less and less, and I do much more of it on the paper. Lori Louise says, my second layers have been universally terrible, so watching this is very helpful as I'm logging brush miles. Lori Louise, the best thing for you to do is just take your time. Second layers are often a struggle because what happens is we do a first layer, it looks really promising. We come to do our second layer, we have some ideas, we know what we're going to do next. We paint that part that we've planned out in our head. And it's going really well, and so then we keep painting because, oh, everything's going so well, I'm going to keep painting. It was going well because we had an idea of our next steps in our head. Once we outrun those next planned steps, then we start to flounder again. So pausing and pulling back, not even leaving the room necessarily, but sometimes just stopping and putting the brush down and taking time to look and think about what you see. Just being a little more intentional with your time can really help those second layers to stay strong and reinforce the painting. We make mistakes because we rush ahead, because we don't take time to kind of engage with the painting and really be present there. Okay, we are pretty much we are pretty much out of time. Evelyn asks a question. I know if I had taken this photo and wanted to paint it, I would have had a hard time editing it. I would want to paint everything. How do you decide what to leave out and what to keep? We are actually going to talk about this next week. My topic for next week is simplifying and how simplifying makes for stronger paintings. I can't simplify if I don't know what's important. So this is where familiarity is your friend. This is why I would encourage you through the course to stick with just a couple of different reference photos and paint them till you are utterly sick of them. And then usually once we're utterly sick of them, we start to rebel a little bit, and then we fall in love with the photo again. So find a photo that makes a great value study and play with it. Paint it just like what it looks like in the photo. Paint a version with weird colors. Paint a version where you exaggerate all the shapes. Paint a version where you simplify everything. These multiple versions will help you get so much more out of the scene than you think is initially there. And there's a lot of learning that happens. Great conversation here, great questions, great input from my past students, from my experienced watercolor painters. I know there's all skill levels here in the course, and that is okay. There is a place for you here, and you are not judged for your skill level. That is not what we are about. We are here to learn watercolor together because it's a learning journey that never ends. I look forward to seeing you in the community, and we will be back next week with another live session here. Until then, feel free to chat and share your work at fearlessartist.net. Bye for now, everyone.